Hey, counseling students, welcome to Chapter 13, Counseling Theory and Practice, How to Integrate the Micro Skills with Multiple Approaches. All right, so we're going to explore how the micro skills framework is used across multiple theories of counseling and psychotherapy, examine the background and practice of crisis and trauma counseling and cognitive behavioral therapy, and become aware of the realities of suicide. You're also going to be able to have the ability to engage in some of the basics of crisis and trauma counseling. And as you move forward in this, you will have the opportunity to take a crisis or trauma counseling course to kind of further solidify this information that I'm going to give you. And have the ability to engage in some of the basics of a major approach to counseling and psychotherapy, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT is the kind of go-to number one theory. And under the umbrella of CBT, you have so many different approaches and modalities. There's too many to name, but you will learn these things in your theories class. It's also one of the theories that insurance companies will pay for. So if you are a person that accepts insurance, then and you're working with a client, as long as you're using CBT techniques, insurance companies pay for that. In my practice, I am cash pay only, so I don't have to worry about insurance companies or worrying about any of that type of stuff. So I just do what I want. I do what's right for my client. But unless a client asks, I'm not one that says, "Oh, I'm using CBT with you. Oh, I'm using DBT with you." I'm That's not something that's necessary. You just take the skills that you know and you apply them in your sessions. All right, so micro skills, the 5 stages in theory. So the competencies you have developed just in this book and through your practice, that's going to enable you to better understand and be able to work with most counseling theories pretty quickly and very competently. Like I said, you're going to learn so many different theories, and it's not going to be overwhelming. It may seem like it's overwhelming just knowing that there are many out there, but when you're in your own practice, most people, most clinicians, we have our go-tos. There are many theoretical constructs, modalities I don't even use. And that's going to depend on what kind of practice you're in. Are you doing individual counseling? Are you doing substance abuse counseling? Are you doing couples counseling? Are you doing family counseling? So it's going to all depend on what your niche and what your specialty is. All right, so although each theory offers a conceptual framework that differs from the others, virtually all theoretical approaches use micro skills and the 5 stages presented in this book. Now, does that mean you're going to remember what are the micro skills? No. Or the 5 stages? Not necessarily. It's like learning how to ride a bike, right? Or learning how to skate. Once you know, they're just kind of ingrained. So it's not about saying, "Oh, I'm using this approach," or, "Oh, I'm doing that." And you'll know the approach, you'll know the style. And if a client does ask, you'll know what to say. All right, so table 13.1 in your text reveals that each theory of counseling has a distinct pattern of micro skill use. So I'm just going to skip this, but this is in the book for you to look at some of the different theories. All right, so let's talk about philosophy. With crisis counseling, that is pragmatic and an action-oriented philosophy. All crisis counseling involves 2 phases: working through the initial trauma and then appropriate follow-up and further counseling if needed. So with crisis, we're handling what's the immediacy, and then we work on follow-up. All right, key methods, the 5 stages and the micro skills. We have safety, calming and caring, normalizing, debriefing the story, assessing strengths and resources, action and advocacy, and then follow up. All right, so other response models. The PFA is an initial model of response to assist disaster survivors. So if you're going to be working in crisis counseling situations, then you'll learn more about this. So their goals are to assess risk, promote safety, stabilize survivors of disasters, and connect them with help and resources. The Red Cross and the APA provide PFA courses and extensive resources on their websites. So if you are a crisis counselor, you might, or you can add that to what you already do. So if there is a hurricane or there is some type of disaster, you will have the skills to be able to get deployed and move out if you choose to do something like that. All right, the triage assessment form is another tool developed to facilitate initial assessment and prioritization of care for disaster survivors, use with cultural sensitivity and consideration of contextual factors. So again, you'll notice that in every chapter we talk about cultural sensitivity or multicultural awareness. And so what we're doing is we're applying each chapter's content to multiculturalism. So each chapter will build on the next for understanding this whole idea of multiculturalism. All right, so note the goal of these strategies is to respond to the immediate needs of the disaster survivors, not to provide psychotherapy on site. So when you are doing crisis counseling, it's immediate. This is what is the immediacy? What do I need right now to help them psychologically in this moment? Not about, the past and traumas and all of that. Is what can I do to get this person through this right now? It's just like when you have a panic attack, right? You're not trying to like get through all of the issues behind you. You're trying to deal with what is right in front of my face. And that's what crisis counseling is. All right, implications for your practice. Counselors need to be ready to help in crisis situations, establish trust and a working relationship. The basic listening skills and the 5-stage structure of the session help. Vicarious traumatization can happen. Each type of crisis is different, and adapt your approach accordingly. So these are all things to think about when you are working in a crisis or trauma situation. And that can happen in your own practice. So it might not be where you're leaving or some natural disaster is happening. It could be that you're getting a call in the middle of the night from a client who's suicidal or who's going through a very intense emotional experience where you need to be on your game. So the ability to be able to handle that situation. All right, crisis counseling first session transcript. Okay, so if you go back in your text and look at that vignette and kind of answer these questions. So what do you think about this example involving a family in a big city dealing with the loss of their apartment after a fire? These are going to be things that clients go through. Did the counselor, Angela Knox, demonstrate appropriate skills during her meeting with the mother, Delasay Ario? Now, that is something you want to go and look at that vignette and assess that therapist. Did they handle, or that counselor, did they appropriately handle this situation and demonstrate those skills the way that they needed to? And then, and then assess what worked well. Did something work well? And what would you have done differently? Because, you can just say, oh, I would have done the same thing when you're answering like questions. But it's really important that most of the time we're not going to do something exactly the way someone else did. We may tweak something or do it a little bit differently. And that doesn't make the other person wrong. It just makes that we would just do it differently. All right, so review research literature to understand factors that might lead to a suicide attempt, maintain a watchful eye for suicide potential, providing immediate crisis support and ensuring a careful referral with client follow-up, look for strengths and resources to build on both for the here and now of the interview or the session and for the long-term safety of the client. What's really important to remember when you are, in practice is that it is okay for a client to say, I don't want to live. Like, I just feel like, and you have to address that, right? You have to address those words. We want to make sure we're not assuming of our clients. We don't want to make them feel uncomfortable. You're not wanting to Baker Act someone prematurely. If they say, if a client tells me like, sometimes I feel like I don't want to live. I'm like, valid. I've thought that too. There's a difference between a thought and an action, right? Your thoughts do not define who you are, just like your thoughts are not going to necessarily determine your actions. We all have had times where our day wasn't going well, or maybe our life wasn't on track or going well. And we felt like, you know what, if I just kind of disappeared, I'd be okay with that. That is not something to be concerned with or alarmed with. I would think that it might be more concerning if we sometimes didn't feel that way, kind of down or out, or just kind of normalizing how we're feeling. We don't want to jump and get worried and start questioning a client. That is very counterproductive. So we want to make sure that we are handling these things appropriately. So you want to look for those strengths and resources to build on and find them long-term safety, and just say, it's okay. Now we have to discuss, do you have intention? Do you have means? And we got to go based on the vibe we get from our client. Trust your own intuitive voice when working with your client. And then recognize the 3 key warning signs of impending suicide: actual threat to kill or hurt themselves. So they say, you know what, I'm planning on it, I'm going to do it. So there is intent. Seeking access to pills, guns, or other routes. So asking, do you have a plan? Do you have access to these things? And then talking or writing about death, dying, or suicide. So now you're fantasizing it. That's when you have to address it, talk about it. You have to ask those key questions and avoid asking why. Remember, why is not good. And we're not giving advice to them. We're not telling them what to do. We are questioning. We have to explore that what and that how, and then we get to that why. All right, so here is a table that's in your text for the date of when this was written or published in 2023. So this is just a table that shows some US suicide data. So you can kind of go through this on your own. It's pretty eye-opening. All right, so in looking at philosophy, CBT is an information processing system. Cognitive activity, cognitive are thoughts or thinking. So when you think of cognition, you think of thinking. So cognitive activity affects behavior. So a lot of times what you think kind of attributes or contributes to how you behave. Cognitive activity may be monitored and altered. Desired behavior change may be affected through cognitive change. And that's, again, cognitive behavioral therapy is a great theory. It's a great therapy for a reason. It's all backed by science. It's all tested, tried and true. It's amazing. It does not mean that it's the only, therapy for people. There are various techniques depending on what the situation is. All right. Let's see. All right, so some specifics of CBT. A base of cognitive response as key to change. So these are things that relate to, CBT, is that the idea is to change the illogical thought pattern into what is productive. Time limited with specific goals. So with CBT, because this is, it's used a lot with managed care. And when I say that, if you're using insurance to pay for therapy, then they allot you usually so many sessions. So it's usually brief counseling, so 6 to 8 weeks. That your insurance will pay for. So there are time limits and there are specific goals that need to be met within that time that you set with your client. A sound relationship is needed, but it's not central. So CBT is all about, it's not about becoming friends with your client, or, you want to have that empathetic relationship, that therapeutic relationship, but this therapy is more about changing that thought pattern, and not so much the relationship dynamic. A collaborative venture between counselor and client that uses a Socratic question and answer style. So I use a lot of Socratic questions that I come up with in my sessions, but I also make sure it's collaborative. So I will give my thoughts and opinions on something, and then I ask my clients, so how did that sit? Hearing me say that, what's your take on that? Or, let's come up with a plan together. What are some things that might work right now? What are some things that might work later? So sometimes with my clients, I'll say, hey, let's try this. So what might be something we can add to this? And then it's about you both coming up with this plan together. And that's with your therapeutic relationship. That's also with your treatment plan as well. You can do that. All right, based on aspects of Stoic philosophy. So it is not things, but what one thinks of things that counts. It's structured and directive. Carl Rogers, therapy that we learned about in the beginning of this chapter, that was about kind of meeting the client where they're at. There's no directives. The client it's empathetic. There's no judgment, obviously. It's just the client. It's not about like working through issues per se. It is, but it's more about just the client talks. And the therapist does not really do anything but listen and maybe ask some things. And so a lot of people will want to use Carl Rogers, theory. And although it's a great starting point, it's not one we want to stay in, because there are a lot of weaknesses with that, especially when we're looking on changing thought patterns, substance abuse, anything like that. We have to change patterns of behavior. And with Carl Rogers' theory, that's not what we're looking for. It's just kind of being with them and where they're at. So we want to make sure that it's structured and directive. That's not his way of doing things. Based on an educational model. And so this is where psychoeducation comes in, and we give, referrals, and we give information to our clients in addition to helping them with their thought patterns. It relies on induction, so inductive reasoning, and homework is essential. So with CBT, there's homework. And sometimes when I have a session with a client, they have homework, and the homework is not a worksheet. Sometimes it is, but rarely is it. It's something I make up, or it's something I'll say, hey, think about this, or write about that, or, I'll give them a directive, something to work on, but it's not going to be something that's this puzzle piece cookie cutter thing. We have to be adaptive in counseling. But that is the thing with homework in CBT, is that it's essential. The next week I might be using a different technique, and I'm not going to have any homework at all. So that's just, it's good to understand the aspects of CBT. All right, so again, another, we're looking at this vignette. What do you think about the CBT session with Carlos and Renee? What basic cognitive therapy techniques did you identify? Did the client make any progress? What other techniques that you have learned so far did you identify in the session? And then what would you have done differently? Again, it's not about that they did something wrong, another therapist, but that might not be something that you do. There's a lot of things that I'm very eclectic, and there's a lot of things that other therapists do that I'm not going to do. I'm going to do my own thing. And that's just, preference. All right, action plan and homework. The fifth stage of the microskills interview has long been action. The final part of the session needs to include a formulation of a concrete action plan based on what was learned in the session. And after the session, you'll take your notes. You're not going to do it during the session, but you're going to take your notes. And then the next session, that's when you're going to revisit. Okay, so last week we talked about this. And what are your thoughts on that now? Or if there was homework, you want to, go over that. Action planning, including that homework assigned, and follow up parts of any treatment plan, because they encourage clients to take home and act on what was learned in the session. More emphasis on behavior change is likely to be a focus. As thoughts change, so do behaviors. Treatment in later sessions potentially will include other interventions. That's where I'm talking about using other things other than CBT. Exercise, of course, will be central in treatment planning, assuming the client is interested and motivated. It is so important not to suggest these cookie cutter things like you should diet, you should exercise, you should journal, you should do this. We are not telling our clients what to do, but we are asking them. So do you have a physical activity pattern? Do you exercise? Do you follow a healthy way of eating? Ask those questions. And if they say, I really want to learn how to exercise, I want to learn how to stay consistent on something, that's then when you're helping assist with that. So again, you're not telling them what to do. You're not saying, oh, you need to exercise. Some people don't want to do that. That's not part of their immediate issue. So we want to make sure, again, that if it's something with you and it's something I just don't know what to say or do, then do your own homework on how to help your client. All right. Now we end with the micro skills and multiple approaches, just kind of touching on that and understanding that. Kind of laying the groundwork for understanding suicide, multicultural issues as we see in every chapter, and then of course ending with your portfolio of competencies and personal reflection. So again, this is just basic counseling skills. We are lightly touching on these things. When you go into another course, you may take a course in suicide. You may take a course in theories, and you may take a course in like CBT, things that you're interested in. That's when you're going to start really honing in on specific classes. This is much like general psychology. When you take general psych, you're learning, there's a chapter in personality, there's a chapter in theories, there's a chapter in motivation, there's a chapter in psychological disorders. And so if you're like, wow, I'm really like vibing that, right, then you're going to take that semester on personality. So it's the same with counseling. You're going to then start, I really want to learn about this. So if dreams are something you really want to know about, then you'll take a semester on dream interpretation. So basic counseling skills just kind of lays the foundation for everything that's to come. So hopefully you got some good info out of that, and we will head into our next and last chapter, chapter 14. All right, peace.